I had this topic come up at every one of 17 town hall meetings I did on healthcare. And people would come and they'd ask me why I didn't support tort reform. And I tell you, I would answer each one of those questions the same. I don't support efforts to try to take away the rights of people under state law and the 7th Amendment of the Constitution to justice. Nobody talks about the 7th Amendment, but it guarantees every American citizen the right to a trial by jury in common law cases like medical malpractice cases and on questions of fact. And one of the most important questions of fact in every common law case is the question of damages.
Welcome back to Outside Counsel. I'm your host, Jeffrey B. Simon. In the second part of my discussion with legendary trial lawyer Randy Johnston, he shares insight into the trial and aftermath of his historic victory over the drug giant Upjohn, followed by a shocking reversal of fortune on the company's appeal of that judgment. Do you believe your prediction that you made in opening statement of the trial that the case would fundamentally change the way those jurors felt about business, government, and our courts?
Your question brings to mind one more thing, Jeffrey, that is just so unfair about the burden we as plaintiff lawyers carry in cases like this. The burden you've carried your entire career representing people who have been hurt. Because I had several of the jurors call me a week after the trial and say, Mr. Johnson, Upjohn has offered to fly us all down to Houston, pay our way, put us up in a hotel, feed us, if they can just talk to us about the trial. And I'm going, don't go. Oh my God.
Because they're going to try to talk you into claiming there was juror misconduct and use that for appeal.
Or they're going to try to figure out, all right, we lost one, how can we screw the next guy? What's the one decision that tipped you over? We'll never say those words again. And there are very few plaintiffs' lawyers who can do that, who have the money to throw at a losing case and say, let me come entertain you and tell me how I can win the next case.
Right.
But I now know, I did not know that at the time, I now know after every big loss that happens, the moneyed interests take the jurors down there, wine and dine them. Number one, as you say, looking for some form of jury misconduct they can use to reverse it. And number two, just looking to constantly refine the defenses so that the people who are hurt have less and less of a chance of getting at real justice in front of a jury. That's the world we live in.
Yeah. You were quoted in the aftermath of the verdict in USA Today as having said that you hope the verdict offers a ray of hope to many other people who have been victimized by this drug. Now, more than 30 years later, do you believe the verdict had that impact?
I totally do. In fact, I would even go so far as to say I know it. We had one post-judgment mediation also while it was on appeal. I think the Court of Appeals ordered us to do it. And again, they didn't offer anything because they were convinced that they had the ability to get it reversed because of that zero verdict for Bill. I didn't believe it at the time, but I was wrong. I understand now the vulnerability that one ruling cost us on the whole thing. In discussing it with my opposing counsel at Baker Botts, Richard Josephson, who's really a fine man and a great trial lawyer, he came to me in the mediation. He liked to ask to talk to me privately, and he said, Randy, he said, they're basically admitting that you won the post-judgment battle because I was quoted in all of the papers. I was on the Maury Povich show. I was on AM Philadelphia and I think Good Morning America. I was, and I had an endless stream of radio interviews, which were a lot more common then than they are today. But I just let them have it. Every interview I had, I talked about this drug and how dangerous it was. And so they said, they admit you've won the post-judgment battle. And the drug's off the market. It went off the market after that.
You believe your verdict played a role in getting that drug off the market?
Totally. Totally.
That's amazing. And of course, that's the very best use of the civil justice system, which is to hold reckless companies accountable where regulation has failed to do so.
Yeah. And I talked to them. I had 2 discussions with them afterwards. I can't remember if I already told you how I left Baker Botts. Did I tell you that story yet?
No?
That's important to the punchline. I was in the labor and employment section defending petrochemical companies up and down the ship channel in employment discrimination cases. And my salary was docked $100 one Christmas for some criticisms that they had. And in fairness, I've often said it wasn't a marriage made in heaven and it wasn't all their fault. After Josephson is telling me all about, you won the post-judgment battle, we've conceded that, I said, you want to rethink that $100?
That's very funny. After you got this amazing verdict, of course, Upjohn appealed it, and their argument, which you've alluded to, was that they made several, but the argument that they were really relying upon was that the claims of the family were derivative of Bill Freeman's claims, and that if he was awarded $0, it is too internally inconsistent for the family to receive anything as well.
And our argument was, look, the fact that your damages have 0 value does not mean there is no damage there. And number one, and number two, how can you even say it's 0 if you're in prison because of it, serving a life sentence? That's impossible. Maybe you have to order a new trial on that, but that's just impossible. And Court of Appeals didn't buy it. We got a dissent, which gave us a finger hold to try to get the Supreme Court to consider it, but they wouldn't. And so the case was over. But the jury verdict that the product was defective became res judicata, even though the judgment was set aside. And they never took another case to trial, and the drug went off the market. And the next year, they did not make $300,000 from the sale of Halcion.
Obviously, its public health and social impact was immense, and you deserve, you and your team and your clients, enormous credit for it. But also, the reversal of the judgment seems terribly unjust for the following reason. I'm sure that Mr. Freeman testified in the case that he suffered enormous emotional torment as a result of what happened. After all, he's in the penitentiary for life, which, in addition to being a very dangerous place, is a long and separate place from his family. And because I'm sure that fact was not disputed, I'm sure there was no cross-examination which went as follows: you really like the penitentiary better than being at home with your family.
Right.
Then his emotional torment has some inherent financial value. It can't be 0. Whatever it is, it can't be 0, since the damages are undisputed. And you should have won on that issue.
I agree. To me, that is just, as my grandmother would say, crystal clear. It was the start of the era of tort reform, and I will be partisan for a moment and say Republicans who were more concerned about business than about people being hurt taking over the court system. And our case just was easy to dismiss. I also have wondered many times if there might have been some component of, while John Marshall was willing to do it, maybe the Court of Appeals just said, I can't give money to the family of a murderer. I don't care what the facts are. I've always wondered if there wasn't some non-judicial, I don't care what the law is, I don't care what the facts is, this is just how I feel, from those judges. But
do you believe it was judicially activist tort reform that reversed that verdict?
I have always believed that.
And what is tort reform for the benefit of our audience?
It's a screwing of people who are hurt without lube, I would say. Uh,
Is that its legal definition?
that's the way I've always seen it. The tort system is a system out of the common law of England that was designed to spread across society the effects of people getting hurt when they are damaged and hurt by the operation of society. And so if I am negligent and I hurt someone, then I end up being held responsible. I don't have to do it intentionally. I reach down to pick up the Coke can that spilled and I run through a school zone and hit a kid. That's my fault. And I have insurance that everyone pays a premium on so that there's money there to compensate that kid, because it's not fair that injured person shoulder 100% of the burden of the loss caused by my negligent conduct. And that system has been in place for hundreds of years. And then starting back somewhere in the 90s, the opposition started calling for what we now call by the shorthand tort reform, which is a way of saying we've got to find a way to make it harder for people who get hurt by the negligent or intentional conduct of others, so that, God bless them, big businesses can thrive without the threat of being held liable for the harm that they do.
What types of groups sponsor or support tort reform legislation in your experience?
The face of it is usually some version of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because they care. In one respect, they're just a lobbying group. They care about big business. Fine, go do what you're supposed to do. But behind them are the richest, biggest individuals and corporations in the world. Every major corporate 500 company. And in my more honest moments, I understand some of the motivation for tort reform. I absolutely am a firm believer that that whole creative thing that I was talking about with plaintiffs' lawyers can, and in some instances has gone too far. And people got money they didn't deserve. But that ignores the fact there's also been lots of hurt people who didn't get the money they did deserve. The tort reform system has never been perfect. And it's not hard to find an example where it goes awry and someone gets money they didn't deserve, or someone loses their business because they got sued and they never should have lost their business, but had a disastrous effect on them. Those stories are out there and real, but they're aberrations. And they are, in fact, a part of the price we pay to not have a country full of people who can't care for themselves and who die horrible deaths because they have no medical care. So, yeah, the mistake I think that plaintiffs' lawyers made during that era, and maybe it's not a mistake, it's just my version of trying to explain something that I find incredible and wrong, is we failed to explain that the system is not perfect and can't be perfect. And if you strive for perfection, then you're always going to find mistakes. It's similar to the way I feel when people gripe about, say, you don't want the government involved because it'll be just like the post office. And my response is, fucking mail arrives every day. I'd love for it to be like the post office. What's the problem with the post office? Yeah, do they lose packages? Yep. But 99% of the time, they don't. It's a pretty well-functioning system. But we did a bad job of somehow communicating what you and I and other lawyers learned in law school, which is that this system benefits society as a whole. It keeps us from having a country. Candid, I could say we almost have a few blocks from here where there are people living under the freeway because they need mental and physical health care and can't get it, and they can't get jobs, and they're now homeless, and we have no solution for them. Some of them may have lost their job, filed bankruptcy, lost everything because they got hurt, and then their car breaks down, and then they can't go to work, and then they lose their job, and we all pay for that. But if you say, oh, you're giving money to people who don't deserve it, that strikes a responsive chord. That's the short, easy to give answer. The long, correct answer takes some more attention. And so that's my speech on tort reform.
In our home state of Texas, we have seen an enormous amount of tort reform law passed over the last quarter century.
Indeed.
And we could talk about various forms of it, chapter and verse. I want to focus your attention on the tort reform, or what you and I would call tort deform, in the space of medical malpractice.
It's the worst example there is.
In Texas, we've had since 2003 a law that caps financial recovery for pain and suffering caused by medical malpractice at $250,000, no matter how much the jury awards, no matter how severe and permanent a patient's injury is, no matter how much pain they're in or for how long, and no matter how recklessly a healthcare provider was in causing that harm. It is now, as a result of a statute, true that they can receive no more than $250,000 from a healthcare provider for their pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Who does that tort reform help?
Bad doctors. It helps bad doctors, bad hospitals. I've tried to explain that to my friends who say, oh, you got to protect the doctors. My response is, which doctors you want to protect? You're talking about protecting doctors who made a mistake, doctors who cut off the wrong leg of a man who has cancer and has to have one leg amputated or gangrene. So now he's going to lose both legs. That's $250,000. And by the way, you're never going to get that $250,000, because for me to hire an expert witness to testify that they made a mistake, that's going to come out of the $250, and my contingent fee is going to come out of the $250 unless you can afford to pay me by the hour. And so the case is just not worth filing. Go home and do your pain and your suffering. Get out of our sight, because we don't want to see you and we don't want to hear about you, and we're not going to compensate you.
Does that law put the interests of reckless doctors ahead of the patients they injure?
Can you believe that? I mean, that's the kind of catchphrase that we need to use. We're putting reckless doctors ahead of the patient, not good doctors. It's just, it's shocking to me that we have become such an unsympathetic, yea, even cruel society that we don't care about people who get hurt.
Is tort reform a scam?
It's easy for me to say yes, that it's a scam. I think it is more akin to the lords and ladies, the royalty of old England, old Austro-Hungarian Empire, where the wealthy, no matter what they do, are protected from ever having to share wealth with the people who get hurt, making them money.
Right. For example, does medical malpractice tort reform improve the quality of healthcare in Texas?
I think it's had the opposite effect. I think it's demonstrable that it has had the opposite effect. Bad doctors who've been driven out of other states because they can't even get insurance. But underneath that, there's something fundamental that has changed about the way plaintiffs' lawyers approach their mission.
We bear some responsibility for allowing ourselves to be defined as hogs, setting aside whether it was fair to describe any plaintiff's lawyer as avaricious. We did create an opening, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. The thing that I come back to is when I got out of the class action business was when I saw plaintiffs' lawyers in that area, and some of them were personal injury. In my particular case, it happened with the breast implant litigation when the class action started being filed there, and I saw plaintiffs' lawyers making millions of dollars and their clients getting next to nothing. If they had been defrauded in some way, their clients get a certificate to go buy a new version of whatever product it was that defrauded them. And that just struck me as not good. It's like, I understand the argument that if it takes a lot of money to prosecute these cases, true. absolutely can. And every client's recovery is small, and only by grouping them all together in class actions do they have any chance of getting anything. 100% true. But all of those settlements where lawyers were making millions of dollars and clients were getting next to nothing in settlements killed it, just killed it. And every state in the nation, other than I think two, adopted such strict class action rules that the whole class action practice died. And now I know there are a lot of lawyers still filing them, and there are places and there are ways to do it, but I'll reverse it and say there are a lot of people who get cheated out of small amounts of money that cannot do anything about it because of the changes to the class action laws. And those changes were the product of bad settlements. They weren't the product of bad trials where they went to trial and got the right award and earned every dollar they got, never question it. They were the product of lawyers cashing in at the expense of the clients sometimes.
I'll tell you a story. My father is a lawyer. He's retired now.
I know him well.
And when I was a law student, I was trying to buy a car with his help. And it was a used car, but it was a Mercedes. It was a very used, but it was a Mercedes. And he said, I will not help you purchase that car, but I will help you purchase another car. I'll give you the same amount of money, but not that car. And I said, why? He said, because that car is a status symbol. And I want you to remember, no matter how long you practice law or whatever else you do after law school, when you can live in a house of whatever size you want, you can buy whatever car you want, maybe more than one car. You are in a service industry and you work for somebody else.
Yeah.
And unless and until you earn the money to buy that status symbol, you'll never appreciate it. Something to that.
No, 100%. How much I respect your dad. He was a man truly devoted to his craft and to his clients. And I think you told me he had recently retired, but he was just a good man. He was fun. He was easy to talk to. He had great stories and he cared about his clients. I love that. When I give lectures, one of the things that I always say is I have a love-hate relationship with the practice of law. I love things about it and I hate things about it. But the thing that I love more than anything else is the fiduciary duty. The whole concept that you put the interest of the client above your own. I love that. And because a lot of my practice is suing lawyers, I have opportunity to confront that issue often. And when I'm explaining it to a jury, most of them have never heard the word fiduciary, don't know what it means. And I always say, it's easy to understand. It's like the Secret Service. They take the bullet for the president. They put his interest or her interest someday, perhaps, we hope, above their own. That's the standard that lawyers are held to. And I love that. I love being someone's hero, being the person that is charged with protecting them, even at my own expense. My heroes in the law have always been the criminal defense lawyers who go to fucking jail because the judge says, tell me what your client said. And they say, I can't do that. My ethical obligations as a lawyer and to my client trump whatever you say, judge. So put me in handcuffs if you must. I'm going to be loyal to that fiduciary duty. And that's what I think. I'm starting to sound like the old get off my yard, man. My theory is, by the way, all of this changed sometime in mid-'80s when lawyers started making, straight out of law school, $100,000 before they even knew where the courthouse was. And the people who started going to law school after that changed. People who would have gone to NBA and to Wall Street started going to law school. And it became just about making money. And we're lucky that, God, I am lucky beyond imagination at the amount of money that I have made practicing law coming from Shamrock, Texas. But it's never just been about making money for me. And the best lawyers I know make money as a byproduct of putting their clients first. And they make a lot of money, but they put the clients first and the money just flows. And I think it will. I think it will continue to. I hope it will.
The Randy Johnston that I have known and revered for 30 years is motivated by the desire to hold companies or people accountable for the things they do when what they do harms others. And you touched on the fact that you have sometimes been a lightning rod in our legal community because you have spoken truth to power, because you have sued lawyers for legal malpractice over years and developed an expertise for that, like you're treated like internal affairs sometimes, like in the police department. And you've had to make reasoned bargains about, do I really want to do this? Do I want to be this unpopular? Do I care?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I mean, first, it's probably more accurate to say I have spoken my sometimes unsupported opinions to power. But I've always been amazed at how indignant lawyers get when I send a demand letter saying, I think you did something wrong here, I'm going to sue you. And 2 hours earlier, they sent a letter to a doctor or a stockbroker or an accountant or someone saying the same thing. But they think they should somehow not be held to that same standard. And that level of hypocrisy just offends me. I had a lawyer say to me one time, so I should put out here, I was making some argument over something, and he just said, I'm not sure I can get all the way up on those horses Randy wants to ride. So maybe I do tend to ride the high horse unjustifiably from time to time. The other part of law that I struggle with is I have said before, trying to describe to my wife the difference between my life and hers. She's an architect and extremely creative, makes beautiful things. And I said, yeah, you get up in the morning and you think, I'm going to go make something beautiful. I get up and put my feet on the floor and think, I'm going to go pick a fight. And the human spirit, other than those sociopaths, the human spirit is not designed for constant conflict. And when you have to fight with everyone you do business with, it changes you. And that's a problem. There's a reason why lawyers have the highest divorce rates, highest suicide rates, highest alcoholism rates, highest drug addiction rates. And it's because we live in a world of constant conflict. You know this as well as anyone. You go into court and you're just fucking waiting for someone to come up behind you and pull your pants down in front of the jury because there's one thing you forgot. Oh, crap. It's the pressure of being responsible for someone else and the fact that everything we do is conflict driven cankers the soul over a lifetime. And you have to find a way to not let that happen.
Oh, you said so much there, and I want to pick up just a couple of threads. The first is just it's like you're in my head and in my heart, and this is not the first time you have that way. Yeah, I do sexual misconduct cases, and sometimes involving very high profile defendants where there's a lot of press about it. And I think about that. I don't want them to lose their spouse. I don't want their family to suffer. Even though my client, in my estimation, was wronged, usually her legal rights were violated.
Right.
That person should be held accountable. But it is not my intention that they do anything other than pay for the harm they've done. Not that a whole bunch of other people get destroyed simply by the humiliation of it all, the sense of betrayal. And I really struggle with that because, as I say, that's not the type of compensation that my client's looking for. And it's certainly not any kind of vengeance for which I'm searching. And I'm very conscious of the fact that somebody can accuse me falsely of something and could have all that weight. And nobody has to remind me that I'm human like anybody else with people that I love dearly. And If somebody accused me of something hard, even if it was 100% untrue, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't hurt a whole lot of people. And
Right.
it's a very complex issue. The second thing, in terms of reflecting on the work that we do and the human cost, even when we're right about the merits of it. You and I belong to an organization, the American Board of Trial Advocates, and I got inducted about 20 years ago. And at least back then, you had to have tried a whole bunch of cases. And I was young, I was 36 at the time. And back then, anyway, the president would call you and congratulate you. And this president was lovely and just said, congratulations. Said, look, we don't have any official records of this, but we think at least on the civil side, you're the youngest or one of the youngest in this community to have ever been inducted at this young age. And how do you feel about that? And I said, I have thinning hair and a broken marriage.
Yeah.
And this person said, that's not really something I can share with others. It's not very inspirational. I said, I'm never going to lie to you. I don't lie to juries.
No, that's
the truth.
That's well put. That's well put. You know what? I think about this a lot, Jeff, and I tend to think in metaphors and stories, but if you'll indulge me just another minute, another story I occasionally tell law students, and I'm not sure they get it, but I think back on a time when I was 16 years old. My good friend Ronnie Curley got a new shotgun, an Ithaca pump. I remember the model. And we were out on a farm of some of his relatives, and I got a borrowed shotgun. So we went, you're going to love this as a personal injury lawyer. We had one of these pickups that have those big rails they used to have where they'd put livestock in the back of the pickup. They're up almost to chest high if you're standing in the back of the truck. So we get in the back, someone's driving. We're bouncing around across the field in the back of this truck with two shotguns, shooting at rabbits that we scare up. And we shot a lot of rabbits. And so we decided to put them all in the bed of the truck so we could show what great hunters we were. I've since, by the way, learned, number one, the most obvious lesson, it's not hard to shoot a rabbit with a shotgun. I thought it was a lot harder than it was, and I was just that good. But that was a great day. And it was probably 20 years later, maybe more, when I realized I just killed a bunch of rabbits for no reason. For me to have that joy of killing something, something had to die. And I think of that as a metaphor for a law license. When I'm a young lawyer, I would have tried any case. Let me go try a case. I don't care how righteous it is. I've got this new shotgun. I want to use it. I want to show my skill. I want to get better at it. But there comes a time in the practice of law, just as there did late in life with me and that shotgun, where you realize for you to do what you do best, something has to die. You can't be a hired gun and not shoot something on the other side. And how you deal with that decides whether people will let you babysit their grandkids, I think.
Randy, what question did I not ask you that you want to make sure we talk about?
I can't think of anything. I will say one more thing. I was speaking at a TTLA seminar one time, and a lawyer got up. So Jim Perdue spoke. Another lawyer who had millions of dollars of verdicts and recovery spoke as well. And all the young lawyers are in awe of these great trial lawyers. And with no disrespect to whoever that other lawyer was, I don't even remember at this moment, I said to them as a group, if you want someone to emulate, it's Jim Perdue. And it's not because he's a great trial lawyer. And it's not because of all the millions of dollars. And it's not because of the war stories he told you. It's because he is the kind of man whose son wants to practice law with him.
Yeah, I love that.
And I have been blessed to have my son practice law with me. And it is one of the things I am most proud of, that he can get up in the morning and want to see me, or at least be willing to.
I'm privileged to know him, and he, like you, is a mensch, just an outstanding human being. And
you're very kind. I'm obviously proud of all of my kids, but he's the one I see the most.
If anyone in our audience has been harmed by a wrongdoer or just wants to consult you about any legal matter, how, Randy Johnston, can they contact you?
My email address is real simple. It's randy@jtlaw.com, JTLAW.com.
You can tell everyone who's listening that there is no finer lawyer, no person who is more wise or who will treat you more fairly than Randy Johnston.
I know that's not true, but I'm going to allow you to say it anyway because I like hearing it. That's very kind of you, Jeff.
You are a credit to our profession. And
Thank
we
you, sir.
at Outside Counsel are very grateful to you for your time and your wisdom. And you know this because I tell you every time I see you, because I've pledged to do it every time I see you, even if we're in the middle of a Mexican food restaurant, that I love you.
I love you, Jeff. You're a good man.
Thank you to my guest, Randy Johnston, for his invaluable insight and brutal honesty about America's civil justice system. Lessons he's learned over a nearly 50-year career as one of America's preeminent trial lawyers. Join us next time for a special Ask Me Anything episode of Outside Counsel. I've handpicked a collection of searing questions submitted by our viewers through social media. I answer questions covering America's most controversial issues: the opioid epidemic, reproductive rights, media misinformation, the state of our politics, climate change, and whether justice is blind or blinded at the U.S. Supreme Court. This podcast is produced by Shannon McDees of Revel and Convey and Larry Shavana. The opinions expressed on Outside Counsel are neither legal nor medical advice. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers, guests, experts, and/or host. They do not expressly nor necessarily reflect the opinion of any institution with which I am or ever have been a member and should never be attributed as such. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Outside Counsel. I'm Jeffrey B. Simon.